As always, to welcome you to this all access presentation. Today I'm joined by Team Wilpers coach Ava Fagin. Ava is currently serving as Assistant Director of Sports Performance at Cleveland State, has recently completed her Master's of Education in Exercise Science, and most importantly, is one of our Team Wilpers coaches. Ava and I met at a gym here in New York City where she was training clients. So I'm pretty happy that we're coming full circle and are back here today for a little bit of conversation. Did I forget anything, Ava?
That was it.
All right. I realized I went a little bit off because I think we have to update your bio on the website because now you have completed that degree, right? Yeah, the bio still says you're working on it, but I was like, this thing's been done for a while.
Just May. I'm recently done, and it feels good.
Well, congratulations. Big accomplishment. Always tough to layer on accolades on top of already busy schedules. So congrats on that.
Thank you.
So speaking of that and speaking of Cleveland State, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about kind of your current position at Cleveland State, the work you do, and the kind of type and breadth of athletes that you're working with.
So my official title is the Assistant Director of Sports Performance. Last year was our first official year moving from the strength and conditioning department to the sports performance department. A lot of collegiate strength and conditioning departments are moving into that title just because, a strength and conditioning coach does so much more than just strength and condition their athletes, strength train and condition their athletes. So we moved into that title just recently, and I oversee all sports performance aspects for men's lacrosse, wrestling, women's soccer, women's tennis, and swim and dive. So those are the teams that are assigned to, that was 5, right? Those are the teams that are assigned to me. We do have more varsity sports on campus that I work with in, the other strength coaches in my department work with. Previously I had worked with fencing, cross country, track and field, men's tennis, and softball. So we've moved around a little bit, but this will be my second year working with those 5. And I do all of their strength training in the weight room for the teams that do require conditioning, which is a lot of them. I do their field work, conditioning, court work, and whatnot with them as well. We do not have dietitians on campus, but we do contract out from the Cleveland Clinic. So I'm qualified, and it is within my scope of practice to work on their macronutrient intake. So I help educate the athletes on their protein, carb, and fat intake and what they need to perform at their best before and after lift, before and after practice. I do their warm-ups for game days and for practice when I can be available to them. So there's a lot within that sports performance realm. Mobility and flexibility and whatnot is the one I missed. So as much as I can do to help them perform better, recover better, and become better athletes on a day-to-day basis, that is my box.
I gotta say, that's pretty incredible. I'm not sure I even quite comprehended how big the difference is between that then strength and conditioning and performance, and just how large that job responsibility is, and the incredible breadth of that you cover there. So that's a pretty massive undertaking, especially with so many different sports. Kind of a follow-up question, maybe based on mostly my own curiosity, is when you're looking at what you said, 5 totally different sports, huge amount of in-gym work, on-field work. How do you manage to work with that large a group?
It's difficult. It's important to note that I work at a mid-major Division I university. So the Power Fives, the ACCs, the SECs, the Big 10, Big 12, which one did I miss? Pac-12.
Which is about to be the Pac-2, so
Right, it is about to be the Pac-2. They're in a much larger scale, and the strength and conditioning and sports performance professionals that work with those teams typically work with 2, maybe 3 sports in which they're required to be at all activities for the sport. I try to spread myself thin, but there's no way that I could go to women's soccer practice, men's lacrosse practice, wrestling practice, swim practice, and women's tennis practice every day, in addition to all of their matches, games, and whatnot, and competitions. So I spread myself as thin as I can. But you manage it by doing kind of, I don't want to say the bare minimum, because I don't just want to do the bare minimum of your job, but you really do fall within the scope of what you do. One of the harder things, I guess I should say it was easier, was when I moved from just doing personal training in New York City to working on a collegiate sports side. there are people that just do their injury mobility prevention and all of that. Those are the athletic trainers. So people always ask, what's the difference between me and an athletic trainer? And an athletic trainer is on the prevention and injury side. Once an athlete gets hurt, or once they're starting to hurt, so to say, the athletic trainer deals with that. They are their first line of defense medically for the athletes. Whereas, working as a personal trainer, you're trying to diagnose back pain every now and then because they don't want to go to a physical therapist. Whereas these kids, once they tear their ACL, obviously knock on wood, but if they tear their ACL, that's not me anymore. That's the surgeon. They're lucky they get it paid for. They get the MRI paid for, so we really do just kind of fall within the injury prevention on the strength side, and then obviously strength building on the strength side, conditioning. And so you manage it, by knowing what you should handle and then handing off what you can't handle to the professionals that can.
It's really interesting. I continue to go off script here, but you're hitting some interesting topics. But I would think translating that outside of the collegiate sports scene, you who have also been a personal trainer in New York City. I'm sure you see all the time people come to ask medical questions, and certainly as a coach, I get asked medical questions all the time, things about nutritionally based that are not in my scope of practice, and maybe I know a little bit about, but refer out. So I think for people watching this and listening, it's so interesting. We talk about having a team of people sometimes, and a physical therapist being that, having a strength trainer, having a run coach, whatever it might be. But each of those people certainly have a scope of practice, and it's important to know, when to break away from those. And as a practitioner, and I'm sure you've seen this, especially in New York City, not at Body Space Fitness for sure, but other gyms where people kind of take on too much of that when they should be referring out. So, not an incredible point to that, other than that it is something that both as an athlete you have to be aware of, that you're getting the advice from the person you should be getting it from. So, to your point of a torn ACL, there's nothing as a strength trainer you're going to do to get that ACL. You got to get into a doctor, into physical therapy, whatever it might be,
right.
Get the treatment, and then that physical therapist can hopefully turn it back over to you on a rehab perspective down the line. So just be thoughtful.
A lot of people say, I compare it a lot to the medical world, coincidentally, but it's, if you're having a joint problem or something within the realm of something hurts, your cardiologist isn't going to cover that. So same thing goes with physical therapists versus nutritionists versus, it's a lot of people to hire if that's your goal, but kind of let people do what they're meant to do.
Yeah, for sure. It's tricky, but let's jump ahead here. So would love for you to talk a little bit about the upcoming 6-week supplement to both the running and cycling strength program. This is something, you and I had a chance to talk about what I wanted from it, what you wanted from it. And so now we have this lovely 6-week program where a lot of people are about to undertake. So if you would kind of just talk about the high level goals of what it is, and why it's designed to help people's running and cycling.
Yeah. So first and foremost, no matter what type of athlete you are, strength and conditioning is important, or just strength training in general is important. In particular, the endurance athletes have to buy into that a little bit more because their volume of training typically it's very high compared to, other type of athletes. I need to turn the comments off because they're distracting me. There we go. And it's very high. So first and foremost, it's important to say that strength training can prevent injury. And that's my number one goal in the weight room or in a gym with an athlete or with a client, is to prevent their likeliness of injury in their main sport. If their main sport is strength training, then obviously we go beyond that and try to build as much muscle and hypertrophy and whatnot as we can and strength. But the number one goal for those endurance athletes is to prevent injury. And we do that by bulletproofing, is a word or a phrase that I like to use a lot, bulletproofing those muscles and those joints as much as we can. So I designed this program in its simplest form to really bulletproof the muscles, the joints, the tendons, and whatnot from the likeliness of injury throughout training for your endurance activity or endurance sport, whether it's just for fun or whether it's for a race, or for a challenge like this. And the goal is to not get injured along the process, obviously, while you are trying to enhance your aerobic capacity, which is what endurance, sports, that's the main focus, is in is enhancing that aerobic capacity and building that aerobic capacity. So I designed this program in order to do that. It's fairly short. I know that the volume of training for endurance sports is very high, and it's hard to get those 2 days in if you need to. And I know we'll touch on that a little bit later. But I wanted to make it short and sweet, and the reps are low in order to really build the strength and muscle growth. It's really what's going to help prevent the injuries from happening. And I sprinkled in a little bit of power, which we'll talk about also. Power in order to enhance the power of your sport, obviously, and muscle turnover and whatnot as quick as we can. So, in order to build speed, you have to build power, so on and so forth. So, I tried to make it all encompassing and give a little taste of what can happen when you strength train a little bit while you're training for endurance sports, because it might be the little piece that you need to add.
Uh, Perfectly said. I love it. Yeah, I feel like I get asked pretty often, like people incorporate strength training and think it's going to be like a huge performance increase, and it might be, but I think you hit the nail on the head. Just probably injury prevention measures as much as anything else. I always like to say aging gracefully. People don't always love to hear about or talk about themselves aging gracefully, but in my opinion, it's that biggest piece of the pie as well, as opposed to the cardiovascular piece. So, kind of a perfect segue here, because I want you to talk about the warm up and its relevance to the workout. And as a guy coming in from the aerobic side, warm up is nice. We talk about it there. I understand there are all these reasons to it, but like the vernacular doesn't quite translate over into the strength thing. Like I walked into Body Space where we met before, and they're like, "Go do your warm up," and I was like, "Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm like kind of warm already," and they're like, "No, idiot! Like this is part of the workout." So why I'm stressing this is like we still use the word warm up on the strength program, but I really want people to understand like why it's there, why it's not actually warm up, and it's actually like the first set of your workout, and its relevance to like making sure that you get the most out of that actual strength training session.
Yeah, so I've met a lot of strength coaches that actually on the sheets they give their athletes in the collegiate setting, it actually just says pre-work,
Yeah.
and I really like that term, and I've started to switch it over a little bit more on the collegiate side, because it is true. It's you're not gonna the same way you wouldn't jump on the treadmill without doing anything before, or I hope you're not doing that, or just run out into the street. You know what I mean? It is pre-work.
Hmm.
It's a lot of neuromuscular activity that has to go into your body saying, okay, I'm going to start behaving differently than I do on a regular basis. Getting up and going to the bathroom, or getting up and walking to the kitchen, or grabbing a glass of water, that is different than what you're doing when you are performing any type of exercise. And as a result, you want to prepare your body to do so. I really like the ramp method, so to say, and that stands for raise temperature, activate muscles, and potentiate, mobilize and potentiate. And so I obviously raising the core temperature of your body by moving and getting your heart rate up, activating the muscles. So a lot of the glute bridges, the single leg glute bridges we're doing, squats, reverse lunges, that's really enhancing that neuromuscular activity that you need before you start the workout itself. Mobilize the joints and the muscles more so than you would on a normal day. So that's kind of where that dynamic stretching comes in. And the potentiation, again, is that neuromuscular activity of really just getting the mind and the body ready, and that neuromuscular connection ready in order to perform. So the warm up is designed in order to do all those things. Whether it's mobilize the joints, I want to work in all planes of motion. So both front and back, side to side, and then that transverse kind of twisting motion, because typically in endurance sports you're just going in one plane forward and back, forward and back, forward and back. So getting your body ready just in case something happens side to side is really good in order to prevent that injury. You're doing the single leg glute bridges and the glute bridges in order to activate the muscles that you're needing to use, and the kind of the powerhouse of both the running and the cycling. And it's really just about getting the body ready. In order, if you're going to pick up weights and just go, your body's going to say, what the heck is going on? So it's kind of a slow ramp, literally.
Yeah, that's great. That is not the first time I've heard that acronym and that explanation. But to be honest, I completely forgotten about it. So it's a super valuable way. Like you know, I think it resonates with people like myself. I've done probably thousands of runs of like still while I'm doing this warm up, and on a running side, I kind of like I know, especially as a guy who's like getting a little bit longer in the tooth. We were talking earlier about how old we were when Facebook came into existence, and like mine was a little later than Ava's, but um, it raising that core temperature, in strength training in particular, where you're not like getting that aerobic buildup. Such a precise answer and great rationale. So thanks for
Yeah.
that. So I do want to kind of go ahead. Oh, I was just skipping one ahead. So to tack onto this on this program, I think it's always a question I see all the time. Didn't see it this time, but I know people will have it. Is just there are recommendations for weights, and they're kind of based on light, medium, heavy, medium slash heavy, light, medium. If you're an athlete coming into this program, how are you picking the appropriate weight? Is it like on an RPE or percentage of body weight combination? None of the above.
Percentage of body weight is a little outdated. I think it's at the end of the day, some people are stronger than that, some people are weaker than that, and that's all dependent on what your everyday activity is and whatnot. I love to use percentage of one rep max in a strength setting, but for endurance athletes, that's not as applicable. So for this one, I use light, medium, heavy a little bit more often. I like to use the two rule. If you're doing an exercise and you could have done way more than two than the reps prescribed, probably time to raise the weights a little bit. If you're doing it, 2 weeks in a row, and we split this up into 3 weeks. If you're doing it 2 weeks in a row, and by that second week, you're like, whoa, I could have done 15 of those, but Ava prescribed 8. Maybe it's time to go up in weight. At the end of the day, progressive overload is what's going to build strength and what's going to build muscle. Your body will only adapt to the demands that you're giving it. So that's the SAID principle, specific adaptation to imposed demands, meaning that if you keep giving it the same thing, it's going to get used to that same thing. So and just like running and just like cycling, eventually you got to bump it up a little bit in order to make the change. So same thing goes with those weights. You're not going to build the strength unless you go up in weight. So I often, look at athletes or clients and say, kind of looks like we could have done 35 of those.
Right.
Maybe we should bump it up a little bit. So when I say light weights, that usually just means that you're working smaller muscles. There's a bent over fly and things like that where you're working such small muscles that those muscles can't withstand the heavier weight. So, but the rule still goes. If you finish it and you could have done 10 more, maybe you use your version of medium weights, and we need to just adjust what your version of light, medium, and heavy weights is. If you're using bigger muscles, that's where I'm going to prescribe the heavier weights, because your bigger muscles, your quads, your hamstrings, your glutes, those can withstand obviously more load than the smaller muscles.
Yeah. Perfect. Just to kind of try to like dive into that a teeny bit deeper. So let's say I've got a set of 8, and for I can't remember a single exercise now. So I'm sure there's at some point some version of a deadlift in there. I'm kind of curious. What I'm pushing at is like, how is there a feeling I should have at the end of my set? And should I be like, this was the last one I could do, or it's like I could do maybe one or two more, versus to your point of like I could do another 8 after this.
Sure. Yeah, I love the two. If you can, if you're like, I could have done 2 more, but that's maybe about it. That's a great place to be in. It gets a little tricky when you sprinkle it in with endurance sports, because at the end of the day, there are going to be days where you do both in one day if your volume of training is really high. And at that point,
Mhm.
you're when you get closer to race day, you're preventing injury. You're doing the strength in order, to maintain the strength that you've built in that more preseason time, and to prevent the injury. So in which case, you might want to use the lighter weights in order to not make yourself sore for those longer and harder runs the next day. But at the same time, you need the weight to be quite quote unquote perfect enough, for it to still maintain the strength that you built. So the 2 to 5 range is probably a little bit more appropriate in that realm. But I do like that 2 rule. If you finish and you're like, I could have done 2, maybe 3, but that's it, then that's a good place. If you finish and you're like, I could have done that while watching TV without even thinking, that's where you have to go up.
Got it. And it's safe to say it's going to just be a lot based on your experience with strength training as well, in terms of knowing that volume, knowing that weight, and knowing how your body responds
Totally.
to that heavy training.
If I prescribe two 20-pound dumbbells for a 2 dumbbell Romanian deadlift, that's going to be insanely heavy for one person, but maybe not insanely heavy for another. So,
Yeah.
use the terms light, medium, heavy in order to really touch everybody, so to say. But I do like the 2 to 3 rule at the end. If you finish and you feel like you could have done 2 or 3 more, I think you're in a pretty good place. Going to failure is a little bit of a bodybuilding thing, and that's not our
Mhm.
goal. But anything more than that, it's likely that your muscles will not adapt to those imposed demands.
I think that's a really like a really great and like easy to utilize today kind of rule. If you can do double the set, you're probably not getting the benefit out of it there. If you can't complete the set, obviously it's probably a little bit too much. And if you can complete it and then have the ability to get two, let's say 2 to 3 extra reps, and you're probably right on. I think probably about as good as guidance as you can get without really breaking down into exercise per exercise. And to your point, like percentage of one rep max, but that's a little bit different scenario.
Yeah, that's the goal.
So I want to talk about jumps, which I find to be a bit misunderstood in the strength training world in general. So there is a squat jump on like first program. And so I'm sure the question will come up, and the things that I hear about jumps and strength training are the same things I hear about knees and running, which is like, oh, it's going to ruin your knees to like run, or it's going to like the squats, jumps are too hard on my knees. So I kind of wanted to, give you an opportunity to talk about why the inclusion of jumps, what are the benefit of including jumps, and if there are any legitimate reasons to be worried about including a jump.
Yeah, so it's a loaded question. um, we use a very weird term, and that weird term is stiff in order to describe where you want your tendons to be. People hear stiff and they're like, I don't want to be stiff. You know what I mean? Which is understandable, but you do want your tendons to be stiff. And jumping and plyometrics build stiffness. So really what that means is you're helping the tendon to withstand, you know, the the bouts of effort, which is repetitive effort in running and cycling over and over and over again. So one is to build the stiffness in your joints. And again, that's a huge prevention of injury. Two, when you really think about what running is in particular, and I'll touch on cycling in a minute, but what you think about running is it is taking off of one foot and landing in the other over and over and over and over and over again for sometimes hours at a time, depending how long you're training for. So, in order to withstand that, you're doing mini jumps. You're really doing mini bounds, if you want to get technical about the term. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, yeah. So the main importance here is to get your body ready in order to do that, to be able to take off the ground and land properly. We also think a lot about deceleration. So, deceleration, you're doing a mini deceleration every time you land on that foot when you're running. And in order to train your body to decelerate and to activate the right muscles, which are, the muscles around your knees being your quads, you want those quads to be strong enough and to withstand. I don't want to say pounding because hopefully you're not pounding on the pavement, but to withstand the pounding of that. And to do that many jumps all the time and to create that stiffness and to create your body getting used to the deceleration and the acceleration of the jump is a way to prepare for that. And it's also a power exercise. And so we see jumps as a power exercise. Hopefully, when you're adding the weight, the 2 dumbbell squat jump with the reset, with no reset, whatever it might be, you are creating power. And at the end of the day, well, one thing is that working on power and working on plyometrics can lead to an increase in aerobic capacity. Your goal is aerobic capacity when you're working on endurance sports. And so it can lead, research has shown that it can lead to an increase in aerobic capacity, which is awesome. And power also gives you the power within the sport. When you think about the power that is required in cycling and running with your hips, your glutes, kind of that midsection of your lower body in order to really push those pedals to go up the hills, that's all, short, quick power as you're pushing down. And so you want that power, obviously, as you're training. And a lot of that power can be built by training the power within the hips and the lower body muscles in your training. That was a long-winded answer, but I hope I covered it.
I think you got it. It's great. I was going to do one like quick follow up just because I think it gets lost in the shuffle. Can you do a quick differentiation between strength and power?
Oh yeah. I actually love this. I love this because there's an old version of power and there's a new version of power. So there's been a lot of research in the last, and I love explaining this to sport coaches too, because their minds are blown. There's an old version of power, and I say old because, and it's not that old. I got my certified strength and conditioning specialist in 2020, and the book, the National Strength and Conditioning Association, really describes power as doing really low reps as high intensity. And so sometimes they'll say power is like doing one power clean for 90%. At the end of the day, now we're moving into more of a speed power definition of power, meaning that you want to be explosive. And explosive is moving weight, whether it's your body weight or whether it's weights itself, as quickly as possible. And we're moving into this velocity based training thing, which is awesome, and the technology is bringing so much more to the weight room. But strength is really building the strength of the muscle, and in order to do that, you need to be over 80 to 85% of your one rep max. So let's say you can squat for 100 pounds. You need to be training 85 pounds or more for less than 6 reps. That's where you're really gonna build the strength of the muscle. Power, we're moving a little bit more into speed power, in which you're training in, depending on speed, strength, speed, and that's all the technical terms for it, but between 40 to 65% of your one rep max as fast as you can. So what we're really trying to do is move the bar as fast as possible, move the weights as fast as possible, move your body as fast as possible when it comes to plyometrics. And that's creating a little bit more of the speed power within your body, as opposed to like the slow movement of strength. The bar will move slow. If it's above 85% of your max, it will move quite slow. If it's in the 40 to 60% range, you're creating a lot of power. Not necessarily strength, but you're creating a lot of power.
Perfect. And to continue prodding this a little bit, can you give some of the the performance benefits of power? And then we kind of try to specify a little bit. Like, I'm always really interested of like why include the power move? Like, what is the benefit of the power move versus the strength move? Because when it was first just explained to me, I was like, it was just a total missing piece of my pie. Like, I never considered needing to incorporate fast bar move workouts. I was like, I'm not a power lifter. Why would I do these power cleans as part of like me just trying to like keep a little healthy runner body going?
What's so funny about power lifters is they actually don't perform power.
There you
Olympic
go.
perform a lot of power. But it's a misconception. So really, it creates explosiveness, and you want to be explosive whether you're finishing the end of the race and you're trying to like get that last bit of energy at the very end. Whether you're running up a hill and you're having to create power pushing off of that one leg each time that you run up or cycle up. You want to be an explosive athlete at the end of the day. Maybe you're starting slow and you want those negative splits and you end fast. You want to be able to create power at some point. We talk about fast twitch and slow twitch muscle fibers a lot in exercise science. And again, that's getting into the nitty gritty, and not every athlete needs to understand that. Most endurance athletes have more slow twitch muscle fibers. They're very slow to fatigue. You can withstand work for a long amount of time, but you still do want the fast twitch muscle fibers when you need to pick up the speed and speed past somebody in a race at the end of the race and whatnot. So we're creating more of those fast twitch muscle fibers every time that we train power.
Great. And just to tack on one final thing on like kind of power versus strength. The power thing I find so interesting in the adult population, which is, outside once again of the collegiate landscape, but on your team Wilpers landscape and on my team Wilpers landscape is so much of the demographic we're working with. Power, adults lose power much faster than they lose strength. And power is also the thing that's associated with so many of our activities of daily living, the things that go back to, well, this is my second time now I'm referring to aging gracefully, but literally getting out of bed, getting out of a chair, off the ground, things of that nature. Power, you're losing it so fast, especially as you're a person past 40 years old, that if it's a missing piece of your pie in training and you're not trying to re-encapsulate that and like hang on to that, it is going to be a negative detriment in sport. And it's going to be a bigger detriment in life. So it was one of the things when I started working with, Ava's former mentor, and I started like, getting into power and doing self-study as well with like Mike Boyle and some of
My dude.
his stuff. Yeah, he's the man. But it's just something that's been missing for so long, and I think it is finally being included. It's not just being included for incredible D1 athletes. It's being included for you know moms,
Good.
grandparents, etc. And we're going to talk a little bit about in just a minute some like kind of older athletes as well, but included in that front too. In a way in which just a couple years ago it probably would have been just like put in, kept on the side burner. So we'll leave that well enough alone and loop back to it, like I said, in just a second here. But so sorry, now just to close this out. So any reason to be concerned with the jumps?
No, they are programmed in order to progress. So phase one is going to be easier and a regression, so to say, than phase two. Um, Obviously, if you're feeling pain the first time you do it, A, lose the weight. B, if you continue to lose pain, um, or continue to have pain, consult a professional that you know. At the end of the day, if you already have knee problems, then there has to be a modification there, and we can always modify jumps by literally just not leaving the ground, squatting down and exploding up through your heels without actually leaving your toes, never leaving the ground. So I make that modification for athletes who are 18 all the time, meaning you should undoubtedly make it for somebody who's 30 and above if you're having that pain already. There is no reason to be concerned, but I always say, proceed with caution, because at the end of the day, if something hurts, don't ignore it. Never ignore it, because then it just gets, you're scratching an itch. If you continue to scratch the itch over and over and over again, your skin won't do well. So same idea. But again, you know, don't be a hero. Never be a hero. Look at the progression and look and say, if you've said I've done squat jumps over and over again, I do depth jumps, I do box jumps. Take the regression. Your volume is high in the endurance training. Your body is withstanding a lot of work. Take the modification for now. Your body will adapt to it.
Yeah. That's great. So good regression, just to like go through the range of motion, keep your feet rooted on the ground. For the runners out there, be thoughtful, as Ava illustrated. If you're having physical issues with a couple jumps, that running is nothing but thousands of single leg balances.
Yeah.
Just and she said bounding back and forth. So it might be something, working with a physical therapist, figuring out, if and why there are problems with the jumps, but it could be a teeny bit of a red flag that there might be some issues in the future, especially if you start to increase your running volume. So,
Yes.
but good regression as well to use, especially to start. So let's jump. So we're going to move on to the questions from the group here. Almost perfect, as we just crossed the 30-minute threshold. So we're exactly on schedule. So great questions. These are questions that come up a lot with strength training too. Very excited to hear your answers. So huge overarching question, probably the biggest question yet, especially in the endurance spectrum. And I'm especially interested to hear your opinion, because this is going to be something you get with your collegiate athletes as well that have individual sport practices. Is curious how to best balance strength work with training for an endurance run event. How can I maximize the benefit without risking soreness and fatigue during my runs? And so once again, just to open it up, like I said, you are bound to see this in every sport you coach. There's going to be a running issue. There's going to be a cycling issue. So just how are you balancing strength work with your other scope of main sport training?
So this is always a work in progress. There are strength coaches that have one opinion. There are sport coaches that have another opinion. I'll touch on my opinion. Don't come for me.
That's all you can do.
I'll touch on my opinion, and I'll touch on some research. But at the end of the day, your sport is your main event. I will never say that the strength training is the main event. You're in that preseason phase. At the end of the day, you are a runner before you are an Olympic lifter. And Mike Boyle, speaking of which, always says this really great quote is, we want mediocre lifters and unbelievable athletes, and something along that line. I do not want them to be perfect lifters. I want them to be amazing athletes. And at the end of the day, you want an amazing runner, and that runner might be a mediocre lifter, and that's okay. So that's one thing. And in order to keep that, when you have the most energy, which is typically for a lot of people first in the morning or first after work, you want to get those runs in. When you are not fatigued is when you want to train the thing that you want to train, meaning you're cycling, you're running. So what we see in cross country, even at the Cleveland State level, they do their 6 a.m. team practice. They do not lift until the team practice is over. Track and fields practices later in the day, but their team lift is still early enough in the morning where there's a solid 8 hours in between when they're lifting and when they're starting their practice. So if you do have to lift before you run, based on whatever it might be, the heat outside, the conditions that you have with your daily life and your work, I would try to separate those two by a long time if you do need to do two in one day. Preventing soreness is something my entire job encompasses, because you get the coaches who are like, they can't be sore for the game, so which is obvious. You don't want to be sore, and at the end of the day, in order to not be sore, you have to program in a certain way. The programming for this specific challenge is done in a way that the reps are low enough, particularly for power and particularly for strength, that you shouldn't really see a lot of soreness. And if you're using those moderate, medium, as I described them, weights, you will see that I prescribe medium or heavier weights as the reps go lower, meaning that you shouldn't see as much soreness for reps of 6 with those heavy weights as you would for reps of 8 or 10 with those heavy weights. And so that's how we prevent the soreness, is lessening how much time under tension the muscles have, really. That's kind of the umbrella
Yeah,
answer to
but
that.
it
Did I
which
touch
is
on everything?
which was a very good one, a very good one indeed. I'm actually curious, if only to validate my own coaching practice. I was speaking with an athlete very recently, like over the weekend, who is an excellent athlete. I mean, we're talking like top percent of human athletes, but they were having the same problem that the rest of us have, which was their strength training was becoming problematic with their running. They were doing a lot more of it. They're preparing for a fall marathon. It was new to them, so they're an incredible athlete, but not an experienced marathoners. They were getting up into some volume they haven't seen before. They're really struggling trying to turn it around between strength sessions and their runs. And so what I had told them initially was that I felt good about, especially during their training, them keeping their frequency, them keeping the heavy weight of their strength training. And so my pivot then, when we were starting to have issues, was I was like, I would rather you keep the heavy weight and just reduce the reps. We don't need 10 reps, 12 reps. Let's make 6 rep sets all of a sudden, but don't start to do the workout with you know, 25% less weight. I'm asking this as a question with a question mark on the end, kind of based on what we were talking about, which is like, I don't want you to stop having that adaptation for your strength training because the weight's not heavy enough. So I'm now in full verification mode just to see, like, am I on to something? Am I completely off
Yeah.
the mark?
Yes. Linear periodization, which is really moving from, the higher reps, low intensity, to the higher intensity, lower reps, works really well in the endurance space. We don't see it as much because we've gotten like super creative, and strength coaches love to try new things and do different periodization models, because some of them have proved to be superior than linear periodization for certain sports, whether it's football or lacrosse or a little bit more of, those contact sport stuff. What we see with cross country and track and field, so those endurance type of sports, is that we see that because the season is so short, you actually, linear periodization works. You can peak for a very short amount of time, and in order to do that, you slowly move into a low rep, high intensity area. So yes, you are onto something. What I was also going to say is that a lot of, running coaches and cycling coaches, they always say keep the hard days hard, keep the easy days easy. So where we tend to get a little mixed up with that is that an easy day means volume down. You know what I mean? Whereas for
Sure,
you
yeah.
guys, it means intensity down, but the volume might be up, because at the end of the day, like an easy run on your Saturday or Sunday is super slow. You're not doing speed work. That's considered easy. For me, I hear volume and I'm like, whoa. So that's where you kind of have to switch the mindset a little bit. Where they really want, the speed, the hill work days to go in conjunction with the strength days. And what I would say, is almost switch that, because at the end of the day, if you're doing strength training the night before you're doing hill work in that 24-hour period, if we're saying, you might be
Yeah.
sore strength work before you do that speed work, and you might not be able to hit that top speed. Whereas if you're doing strength days on Thursday or Friday, Thursday night, Friday morning, at that easy run on Saturday, it's easier to run an easier run, when you're able to go slow, and you are able to go slow after strength training. At the end of the day, though, if your strength training is programmed correctly, you shouldn't have this like insane soreness, the day after, from doing that low volume, high intensity. So
Yeah.
it does take a lot of trial and error. And what I've seen with our team Wilpers athletes is that trial and error, is saying, I'm not getting the speed in. I'm not hitting my top speed when I do the strength training the day before. And I said, okay, let's do top speed and then do the strength training after, whether it's 12 hours later, whether it's 24 hours later, and let's see how the easy run feels on the weekend, and so on and so forth. So it does take a little bit of trial, but I would say give yourself the time before you need to go do those harder workouts after strength training so that you can mitigate the soreness.
Yeah, and I wish the question is like part of the, or kind of part of the next question I talked about. But we're kind of on it here, so natural just to continue on a little bit. It's so different person to person to person, and it doesn't necessarily mean that like one athlete's better than another athlete either. In terms of like, I do strength training today, I'm sore later, I'm sore tomorrow. Like everybody's got this different reaction to it. And, kind of as I mentioned earlier, it's going to also be hugely dependent upon your history, and training history in particular with strength training and, how often you do it, how consistently. I've been a little like off of it here for a while for various reasons. So I know already coming back in, it's going to be a tough couple weeks and I'll have to be thoughtful. And then, my history, my overall training history, I should respond relatively quickly. But kind of the question we hear so much is like, where do you put it on the week, which you're kind of talking about. It's just tough. Like I'm thinking about a different athlete right now, and their opportunity was only to do strength training in the nighttime. And their best time to do it was like really the night before their key run session the following morning. So they run in the morning, they strength train at night. And I was like, we can't do this. Can't have this strength training session at the night. And like you plan to be like on your best, the next morning. But what we could do is do that strength training the night before his long run, which is tough. It takes that. He's a pretty good athlete. I thought he could handle it, but really the goal of that run is to dial back the pace to like make the effort feel a little bit easier. We found that was a lot more successful than trying to do it the other way around.
Great.
A personal experience, and once again, we'll get to this here with people with 4, 5, 6 day a week schedules, but I couldn't do, I mean, I could do, it just didn't, it ultimately was too much. I could, like, if I strength trained first thing in the morning, what was a better workout for me, and I could come back about 4, 5, 6 hours later and do some easy running. My body responded pretty well. I could also come back and I could run high intensity intervals that afternoon, and I actually would typically feel great because I was like very activated. The muscles that were still engaged from the morning, and then the next day I was just a wreck from way overdoing my like hard day too hard. So it kind of goes to the appropriate strain that a body needs to take. But it was just like, once again, an experimentation for me of how much was too much. So I know if I'm doing strength training in the morning, I need to follow with easy running later in the afternoon or early evening. If I'm going to do key running first thing in the morning, I might be able to do key strength training 6, 7, 8 hours later if I have to. Otherwise, I would probably prefer to do it on its own day independently. But once again, if you're working at a 4, 5, 6 day a week schedule, at some point you're doubling down.
Yeah. Yeah, again, it's a lot of trial and error. There is something to be said about potentiation, and we've done a lot of research with that with athletes. That's why a lot of times, some athletes do game day lifts. We see a lot of
Yeah.
collegiate basketball players these days doing a 15, 20-minute lift, and they're doing mostly power. They're moving the bar as fast as they can. They're potentiating their muscles in order to perform better in the game. And we see it a lot. It's hard for coaches to buy into because there's an old school way of like, oh, you're sore every time you lift. The goal is not to be sore every time you lift. If you cannot sit down on the couch or the toilet the day after you lift, there's a problem. There's a problem. There's soreness, don't get me wrong, but we always have to do the body check-ins and say, how do we feel? So if you're new to lifting and you're participating in this challenge and you haven't picked up a weight in your life, but you're like, I'm going to do it. I bought my weights from Amazon. I'm ready to go. You're going to feel the soreness the first week or two. It's new. Your body is going to be sore when you do something new. And at the end of the day, the hope is by the second phase, you're a little bit more used to doing the weight training and doing the strength training during a run phase or during a run microcycle, so to say. So
Yeah.
the goal is to really get your body used to it. But again, don't expect it to be perfect at the beginning, because if you're not used to it, you're not used to it. But at the end of the day, like I said earlier, your body responds. And that's one of the coolest things about exercise science, is that we can train our bodies to do different things, whether it's look better, perform better, And that's to me like the coolest thing about exercise in general. So um, let your body adapt because it will adapt.
For sure. Not to mention, I think strength training in particular, one of the reasons I love it for runners is it falls into a movement as the medicine sort of scenario that is a great range of motion exercise. In order to do a squat, you have to go through an incredible range of motion with your hips. That's also required in running. You get to use weights as an implement to help move through it. So it becomes a great movement exercise on top of everything else.
Yeah.
All right. Well, kind of jump ahead to our next question here, which is an important one, and I think resonate with a lot of people. Which is, I know that strength training is crucial, especially for older slash masters runners, which is anyone over 40. I'm just returning to strength training after a hiatus from injury and discovering that my previous 90-second plank are more like 10 seconds. Should I just start with body weight? How do I determine what is appropriate with heavy weights? We kind of already talked about that. If I'm adding a fourth day of running to my previous 3 week, do I double up a run day with strength? I like to give my body one full day of rest a week to recover. Yes, which I would recommend. So, told Ava I wanted to break this question in a few parts here, some of which we've already touched on a little bit. But I think maybe the most pressing here is was kind of curious your thoughts and opinions, and you've had this background as well, training in New York City as opposed to your current post, which is strength training suggestion for older athletes, things to do, things to avoid, general importance for training as a we'll classify it just as senior, so 40 and above.
40
Oh,
above.
master. Did I say senior? Master. We'll classify it
I
as a
was gonna
master athlete.
say.
Master athlete, 40 and above.
um, First of all, there's a reason for progression. At the end of the day, you cannot start with something that your body cannot handle. So, well, first of all, hiring a professional is something that I just always recommend, which you have already done by jumping into the challenge and knowing that professionals actually program the challenge, whether it's the running, the cycling, or the strength training. So check done, and you did that. That's good. But I think at the end of the day, strength training is for everybody, and just because you're older doesn't mean you can't participate in it. But you do have to allow yourself the time to adapt. We do lose muscle as we get older. That's just the fact of the matter. And the longer you go without training the muscle, the quicker the muscle will go down. And in order to build it back up, you got to go slow to build it back up. And that's life. You know what I mean? But I've seen people start training in their 60s, and they make amazing progress. But the reason they make the amazing progress is because they really do allow their bodies to adapt slowly to each of the demands that you're giving it. And so starting with body weight is not a bad thing. At the end of the day, the body weight movement might be giving the muscle that progressive overload compared to what you've been doing. To progress past body weight, you got to add a little bit of weight. So you do add a little bit of weight after 2 weeks, and then you add a little bit more weight after 2 weeks, and eventually you're at the point where you're using difficult medium weights that you would consider medium, so to say. But it's because you started at the beginning. If you're coming back from an injury, it's great to start with body weight. If this feels easy and you're like, I've done that for years, I have no pain, I could have squat for 100 times in a row, then great, add a little bit of weight. It will get a little bit harder. And I think it's just really important to follow the progression. With that said, it really does help build bone density, and that's probably the number one way to build back bone density or to process as we get older, especially for women because they're more prone to it. And so at the end of the day, jump into it. Don't say like I'm strength as I'm older. Jump into it, but jump into it really slowly. Dip your toe in the water and see how it feels. And again, hire the professional if you feel like you need a little bit more of that one-on-one guidance. But this program in itself is programmed to progress slowly. And we're saying use light weights, use medium weights at a time. Not right. Don't use heavy weights in the beginning, but use them on week 3. Things like that, because we want it to be a slow progression. But be mindful of your body and know when things hurt. In terms of the going twice a day, sometimes you have to. If you strength train once a week, it's not going to do much. Unfortunately, it has to be 2 times a week or more in order to maintain or build. So if you're in that high area of running right before the race and you're trying to get it all in and you have to strength train, like John and I talked about earlier, sometimes you have to do it the same day, and that's working with a coach or really listening to your body to know when you're going to be able to get it done at its higher level. If you have to use a little bit lighter weights that time because your run that morning was super hard, then that's what you do. You always should modify in the best way that you can.
Yeah. Outstanding. And to kind of just the second to that, you know, strength training for athletes coming back after injury time or time off. And I mentioned you mentioned you kind of have to like meet yourself where you are. I think people get a sense like to know how to do it a little bit better on their sport sometimes, with running or cycling, etc. But sometimes it's hard. Like if you've been in a strength progression and you're like, I'll just come back and like pick up where I go. But any this might be a tough one overall, but just suggestions on like how to regress that to an appropriate spot to kind of jump back into it.
Yeah, I mean, in the world of collegiate sports, we call it return to play.
Yeah,
Um, there's return to play in every scenario, whether it was an athlete in the height of COVID that had COVID. There was a 3-week return to play protocol.
right.
I personally have a required return to play protocol from the National Strength and Conditioning Association and the Collegiate Strength and Conditioning Coaches Association. So we all have return to play protocols, and you should follow those protocols. And what those protocols are is pulling volume off and pulling intensity off. And so, my athletes come back at the end of August, and I don't know what they did all summer. I don't care what they did all summer. I'm gonna watch what they do, and if they look great, I'll progress them. If they don't look great, then we regress. At the end of the day, should bring the volume down and bring the intensity down. If you're used to doing a goblet squat with a 50-pound dumbbell for 10 reps, but you took a lot of time off, grab a 35-pound. It feels I mean, worst that happens is it feels easy and you go up, you know?
Yeah,
So, and it's a humbling experience. We've all been there, you know? We have all been in the place where you have to pull back and wrap up again, but lower the intensity and lower the volume, and you can always raise it slowly as you go. You never want to start with the high intensity and the high volume, realize that you just re-injured yourself, and take yourself back more steps than necessary. So
yeah,
low volume, low intensity at the beginning, and then eventually ramp it up to what's prescribed.
perfect. Uh, we'll do our final question here as we're coming to time, and then let everybody, and I'll let you get back to your day. But this is just one. Once again, I'm sure you see it all the time now. Definitely saw it when you were a trainer in New York City. Any advice on how to best incorporate strength training without increasing wear and tear for problematic joint? So can maintain a moderate running program, but squats and lunges tend to be too much to load onto the knee. So that in this particular scenario, so I think we can probably stretch it, like open it up a little bit, and just say, how do you go about it? Let's say well, I'll try to actually specify this a little bit more. Someone's coming into the 6-week program that we're injury that they are thoughtful or cognizant of, and if we need to, we can use the knee in this scenario. If they were coming to you as a one-on-one personal trainer, how are you working with that athlete in order to take care of that issue?
Again, it's a lot of trial and error. I've had a lot of athletes that the knee only bothers them when they're cycling, and when they're in the weight room, they're fine. So that's something I work with the athletic trainers a lot on. This is they're wanting to pull them back in the weight room, but the weight room they feel fine in. So so it is a lot of trial and error. Again, lowering the volume and lowering the intensity in order to find that sweet spot where they're still able to work the muscle, but there's no pain.
Mhm.
Is a really good place to be in. If you're nervous about the squats and the lunges and whatnot in a program, start body weight, see how it feels, and then progress to those lighter, medium, heavy weights as you feel better. So I do think knowing regressions is a really great thing to do. If lunges bother you, try a split squat where you're using that back foot almost as like a kickstand, and as a little touch on the ground for it to both legs work a little bit more. If you're feeling like the split squat bothers you and you have access to a TRX, or you have access to like a table or a counter next to you, put your hand on the table or the counter next to you and kind of use a little bit of that for balance so that you're really able to drive through that front heel, activate your glute, make sure that your posterior chain is activated instead of your quads so that your knees stay protected. Understanding regressions is good, and Google is a powerful term and a powerful tool, I should say, in these scenarios. If somebody has written a general program that is put out to thousands of people, they help in the one-on-one scenario. But what you can do, if there's reverse lunges and you say reverse lunges bother your knees, what's a regression? That's, I would hope that Google would give split squat as that
Yeah,
regression. So it is a powerful tool, and being able to scale yourself back and let the ego go a little bit and know that there are muscles that you have to build up. If your knees are bothering you, it's likely that something else is weak. So we have to build up those muscles surrounding the stabilized joints, and a knee is a stabilizer. in
Yeah.
order to push past that injury.
Great. Just to kind of go like, and we'll dig into this one the teeniest bit more because something I hear more than I would like from, I'm mostly encountering runners, but is that people have trouble with lunges. And when I think about the running motion, that gives me trouble as the coach. This particular scenario, there's like an arthritis thing going on, so it's
Hmm.
what you said. It has a lot to do with supporting the other muscles. I think you still have to go after it, in my opinion. Ava can correct me, but it going back, it makes me nervous when I hear someone can't do a lunge because if I'm going to give them a suggestion to run and especially run with intensity, I want them to be able to do a lunge. So can you maybe speak to just a little bit like, and I think you kind of have, but maybe why that being able to go through that motion is important. Like if you're an athlete that's having a difficult time with squats and lunges, like why it's relevant to work up to being able to do those things.
Yeah. So, Mike Boyle, as you mentioned him earlier, and obviously for those that don't know him, he's a really well-known strength coach based out of Boston. But and some people hate him because he loves these radical ideas, and I love his radical ideas because I. But you know, I there are certain joints that are supposed to be mobile joints and certain joints that are supposed to be stable. And we use the above and below kind of technique in order to find that. Your ankle should be more mobile. The joint above your ankle is your knee, should be more stable. The joint above your knee is your hip, and ideally it should be more mobile. At the end of the day, though, your hips do have stabilizers. And when you are landing on that one foot in a run, your hips have to act in order to not shift in which one way so that your femur can actually stabilize within your hip in order to push off of it again to go into that next step for the run. And when you slow down running in a video, you see how much landing on that foot you really have to stabilize. Um, and the reason that we really want runners and cyclists to be able to do those lunges is because running is like a quarter lunge. You have to be able to stabilize in there, and you have to be able to decelerate in those muscles in order to push off of them again, which is really what the lunge is, that eccentric and concentric contraction of the lower body power muscles. And so really what I think I would look at is whether they're performing the exercise correctly enough to activate the muscles that need to be activated. I think oftentimes in a lunge, everybody drives through like their toe because runners love to lift in running shoes. Don't do that. They it's like got the cushion in the running shoes so that they naturally push with their toe. Pushing through your toe is gonna activate the anterior, and I'm like hitting. Nobody can see my knee. It is going to activate the anterior portion of your leg, so your quads. Whereas if you're driving through your heel coming up from a lunge, you're able to activate your glutes and your hamstrings a little bit more. Those glutes help to stabilize your hips, right? So
Yeah.
being able to strengthen the hips by way of strengthening the glutes and the hamstrings is important. So being able to withstand the mobility and the stability of a lunge will carry over really well to withstanding the mobility and the stability of the slowed down running motion. So, being able to look at that and to say, like, this is, I don't care if I have trouble doing like lunges. We need to actually see what the problem is because I have trouble doing lunges. You have to be able to like pull back the layers of the onion a little bit and see where is this problem coming from. Because if you can't withstand a lunge, withstanding mini quarter lunges, which is running over and over and over again, is going to create wear and tear.
Yeah. You just articulated it much better than I did, which is, not being able to do that motion is a big red flag for me. So I don't, when I hear it, I don't like athletes necessarily to avoid the movement pattern. Exactly what Ava said. I think athletes have to, it's then kind of a job to figure out what's the issue, which is probably there are multiple things. There might be some mobility, there might be some strength, and stability issues. And using a movement regression, like Ava mentioned, to get to that, working on that regression in order to feel comfortable there, and then tiptoeing a little bit forward, and so that you can actually go through that range of motion with stability is big. Otherwise, once again, because of that quarter lunge nature, you're really tiptoeing around danger to be, have a run pattern, in a scenario in which case, a lunge is that uncomfortable. So that's why it always gives me a little like red flag, spidey sense, going up there.
But peel it back. There's nothing. Listen, like I'm very well trained in strength training. I've been strength. routine, and I see a physical therapist for like little tweaks I have in my hip, so, and that's really just peeling back the layers of what might be wrong in those deep hip stabilizers and deep external rotators. So there's no shame in pulling it back a little bit.
Well, Ava, we did it. Thank you
We
so
did it.
much for joining me. This was incredibly helpful and valuable to me. I'll only speak for myself, but I expect that other people took a ton from this as well. So I appreciate your time and your expertise. And to everybody out there, thanks so much for joining us. I hope this was valuable, and we'll see you back next time.
Thank you guys. Thanks, John.
Bye, Ava.
Bye.